A teacher's job is to read her students. But when Mrs. Harlow decided the quiet boy in the back was trouble, she acted fast. Too fast. By the time she learned who he really was, the damage had already been done, and the superintendent was standing at her classroom door. The Monday bell rang with a tired, metallic groan, and the noise of the hallway rolled in like a restless tide. Lockers slammed, sneakers squeaked, and clusters of students drifted toward their classrooms in loose knots. In room 214, the October sunlight slanted across the whiteboard where Mrs. Nora Harlow had already written the day's plan in neat, deliberate handwriting. Close reading, silence and subtext. Homework due, Friday. 18 years of teaching had made her precise, a woman who believed in clean desks, straight posture, and quick answers. She liked students who met her eyes when they spoke, and she noticed immediately when they didn't. From the back of the room, Daniel Moore sat in seat 24, second from the window. He wore a navy hoodie over a plain black t-shirt, notebook open but untouched. His pen was capped, resting on the margin as if it might decide to work later. His posture wasn't defiant or lazy, just still. The kind of stillness that made people uneasy when they couldn't read it. Phones away, Harlow said without looking up from her attendance sheet. Today, we're reading silence. Yes, silence. What it does to tone and how it becomes meaning. The class gave the usual half-groan. That was more habit than rebellion. Maya twirled a bright yellow highlighter between her fingers. Tarek leaned back in his chair, tapping a slow rhythm on the desk. Harlow's eyes scanned the room, landing briefly on Daniel. He wasn't avoiding her gaze, but he wasn't inviting it either. Page 78, she instructed. Underline metaphors, box imagery, and circle any line that makes you feel something you can't explain. And yes, that's a serious assignment. She moved up the front row, dropping graded essays on the desks with a clipped, efficient grace. Good work, Kai. Watch your commas, Ella. Tarek, a thesis is not a text message. When she reached Daniel's desk, she placed his paper face down. He slid it under his notebook without looking at it. The casualness of it tugged at her. "You'll want to read that," she said quietly. He nodded once. "Today," she announced to the room, "we're talking about the author's choice to leave air on the page. White space isn't lazy, it's loaded." She called on Maya, then Tarek, then Kai, and then, inevitably, "Daniel, what does the empty line between these stanzas do?" He looked up. "I'm still thinking." "You can think out loud," she said with a practiced smile. "I'd like to listen first." It wasn't rude. It wasn't sharp. But to Harlow, it landed like a refusal. "Participation is part of your grade," she said. "Listening is valuable. Speaking is required." She moved on, but the exchange stuck in the air like chalk dust. By the second question, a fine crack in the morning had started to widen. Not a scene, just a subtle pressure that creeps in when a teacher's rhythm stutters. Daniel underlined a line the class had skimmed past, box of metaphor that Harlow had only grazed. He was clearly working. But it wasn't the kind of work Harlow could grade in the moment, and that chafed. The door tapped open. Mr. Dean, the science teacher on hall duty, stuck his head in and tapped 2 fingers to his watch, a friendly keep it tight. Harlow smiled without her eyes. "Daniel," she said, voice brightening to a 2-even pitch, "you've had time." He didn't drop his gaze. "I'm fine listening." "We are not a podcast, Mr. Moore." A few soft laughs. Harmless in sound, mean in effect. Maya glanced from Harlow to Daniel. Her highlighter had stopped spinning. "Participation is part of your learning," Harlow continued, stacking rationale like bricks. "You cannot sit out a discussion." "I can speak later," Daniel said, even in low. "And I can call security now," she replied, a joke shaped like a threat shaped like a joke. Silence opened, wide, uncomfortable. "Outside, please," she added. "Take your things. When you're ready to be present, you can rejoin." Daniel closed his notebook. The chair legs screeched, a sound larger than one desk should make. He slung his backpack over one shoulder, slid the face-down essay fully into the pocket, and stepped into the hallway without a word. The door sighed shut. Harlow clapped her hands softly. "Page 79. Tarek, What do you make of the gap between these lines? Tarek cleared his throat, eyes flicking at the door. It's like the narrator needs a blank space to breathe. Good, Harlow said too quickly, and that breath changes the meaning. Maya stared at the door and felt something like grit in her teeth. The corridor smelled like wintergreen and copier toner. Posters curled on a bulletin board. College night, Can Food Drive, tryouts of the spring musical. Daniel leaned against cool cinder block, counted breaths. 4 in, hold 4 out. Not because he was unraveling, but because counting was a way to keep the morning in its lane. At the far end, Vice Principal Aaron Carter slipped out of his office. Clipboard tucked under his arm, tie slightly crooked, the kind of person who moved like he had 3 places to be and enough grace to make it look like one. He clocked Daniel, slowed, and approached. "Mr. Moore," Carter said, stopping 2 feet away. Close enough to show care, far enough to show respect. "Everything okay?" "Mrs. Harlow asked me to step out." "Why?" "She wants more voice," Daniel said, tapping 2 fingers at his throat in a shorthand he'd started using since last week. "I'm not there yet." Carter's eyes sharpened. The note should be on file. He angled his head toward the door. "Hang here." Inside the classroom, his voice dropped to a private register. "Mrs. Harlow, did you receive the medical accommodation for Daniel Moore?" Harlow's reply was taut. "I removed him for refusing to participate. I have a standard to maintain." "Refusal is different from accommodation," Carter said, calm. "Let me check with the office." Harlow's lips tightened. "In the absence of information, I made a professional judgment. And in the presence of a student," Carter said, "we ask before we assume." He slipped back out. "Walk with me," he told Daniel. The main office breathed printer heat and old coffee. Mrs. Patel, the secretary, sat behind a high desk with the posture of someone who become the school's memory. She spotted Daniel and gave him a soft smile that said, "I know you," without requiring a reply. "Help?" Carter asked, already leaning over the counter. "Name and need," Patel said, hands on the keyboard. "Daniel Moore, doctor's note, last Thursday." Her fingers tapped a pattern that had become music, then hesitated. Found it, scanned and time-stamped. A pause. But the Friday push glitched. Half the staff got it. Half didn't. I added it to the shared drive. "Print," Carter said. The printer coughed out a single clean page. Patel stapled it, slid it over, and turned to Daniel. "Headaches?" "Less." "Good." She looked back at Carter. "Be kind." "I am," he said. He read the note, concise, clear. Temporary restriction on prolonged speaking due to concussion. Participation may be demonstrated via written notes, marked text, or post-discussion check-ins. Signed by Dr. L. Greer. Dated. Official. The office phone rang. Line 2. Patel listened, glanced at Daniel, then covered the receiver. "Aaron," she said, voice low, "the superintendent's en route." A muscle flickered in Carter's jaw. Not panic, calculation. "Thanks." He slid the note into a clear sleeve. "Let's go." Harlow was diagramming a thesis spine on the board when Carter returned. Paper in hand like a warrant he wished were an olive branch. He waited until she set her marker down. "Medical accommodations," he said, laying the note on her desk. "Friday's email didn't reach you. That's on our system. The restriction is temporary. The participation can be written." Harlow read, color rising a shade that clashed with her lavender scarf. "No one told me," she said, something between defense and confession. "That's why I'm telling you now," Carter said. "Seat him. I'll log an alternate participation note in the SIS. He still refused to speak," she said. "Because he's not supposed to," Carter said, letting a sliver of firmness through. "We adapt." He's returning to his seat. Harlow glanced toward the doorway. Daniel stood there, neither small nor large, just present. "Fine," she said, "cool." Then to the class. Page 82. Silence is structure. Daniel slid back into seat 24. He uncapped his pen. The room exhaled without admitting it had been holding its breath. In the hallway, Mrs. Patel reappeared, catching Carter's eye and lifting 2 fingers. 2 minutes. He nodded. She mouthed, "Parking lot." "Carry on," Carter told Harlow, and stepped out. The front doors parted around Superintendent James more like the building recognized him. He didn't hurry. He didn't need to. Rooms tended to meet him halfway. Dark suit, muted tie, the measured gravity of someone who spent his days deciding where pressure should go. Carter met him halfway down the corridor. "Sir, Mr. Carter," Moore said, eyes already searching past for a glimpse of Daniel. "Status?" "Back in class," Carter said. System hiccup. "Teacher didn't receive the accommodation. I've got the note." Moore took the sheet, scanned, nodded once, reading it the way he might read a budget line, thoroughly and fast. "And the handling?" "Correcting now," Carter said. "We were about to talk to her." "Let's," Moore said. Not a command. A conclusion. They turned toward 214 together, their pace quick, without being loud. 2 measured taps on the classroom door. Heads lifted. The room trimmed its edges into attention before anyone said who it was. "Come in," Harlow called, smoothing her expression into professional hospitality. The door opened. Superintendent Moore stepped in with Vice Principal Carter just behind him. A small ripple ran through the desks, that collective intake students don't know they make when power enters and the temperature changes. "Mrs. Harlow," Carter said, "this is Superintendent Moore." The name landed like a book on a table. A few students straightened. One whispered, "Oh." "Good afternoon," Moore said to the room. He didn't raise his voice. It simply carried. He turned to Harlow. "May we speak in the hall?" "Of course," she said, and followed them out. In the corridor, Carter handed her the note again, more ceremony than necessity. "For the record." "I've seen it," Harlow said, chin lifted a degree. "I was informed." "Our system failed you," Moore said evenly. "And my son." Her eyes flickered, surprise, then bristle. "I maintain standards in my classroom." "As do I," Moore said, calm. "One is to distinguish defiance from circumstance. Another is to ask a question before issuing a consequence." "He refused to participate," she said, still reaching for the ground she'd staked. "He requested to listen," Moore replied. "Listening, under a medical restriction, is participation." Her breath caught. "If I had known, then the lesson today would be about literature and people." Moore said, the faintest warmth threading in. "Silence is not absence. Sometimes it's labor. Sometimes survival." Carter stepped in to redirect the current. "We'll add SAS alerts for medical accommodations. No more email roulette. I'll brief department chairs this afternoon." Harlow nodded once, tight. "I'll speak with Daniel after class." Privately. Moore glanced through the narrow window. Daniel sat with his pen poised over the margin, pressing a tab against a paragraph most of the room had missed. "Good," Moore said. "Thank you." They re-entered. Harlow returned to the board. The room pretended it hadn't been listening. It had been. The passing bell rang and disgorged the class into the hallway in a tide of zippers and half-conversations. Daniel stayed seated. Harlow lifted a hand, not a stop sign, more like a porch light. "Daniel," she said. The gloss had left her tone. "A minute?" He stood by her desk, hands easy at his sides, the way someone stands when they've decided not to make anyone else decide anything. "I didn't have your note," she said, words precise. "But I should have asked. That's my mistake." He nodded once. "I have a son," she said, as if confessing a soft thing might cost less than a hard one. "When we moved, he went quiet for months. His teacher called it stubborn. It was mapping. I forgot today." "I can write," Daniel said, "and talk after class. Just not on demand." "Not yet." "That counts," she said. She opened a drawer, took out a small stack of colored tabs, and handed them over. "Mark anything you want us to discuss. Bring me your margins. We'll call it participation." He took them. Plastic clicked in his palm. "Thank you." In the hall, Moore and Carter linger with the patience of men who know that rushing a correction can ruin it. Moore touched Daniel's shoulder with 2 fingers, a check-in more than a claim. "You okay?" "Yeah," Daniel said. "Math next." Carter asked, mock sympathy in his tone. Daniel's mouth tipped. Sadly, "Go be brave," Carter said. Moore watched him fold into the stream and then turned to Carter. "I appreciate the speed." "It's the job," Carter said. Moore's mouth tugged. Not everyone does every part of it. By lunch, the story had splintered into versions. In some, Harlow kicked out a kid for not talking. In others, the kid talked back. The one detail that rarely made it into the hallway edit was the word concussion. At table 7, Maya, Tarek, Kai, and Ashlyn unwrapped sandwiches like offerings to the god of not having to eat cafeteria pizza. "She hates quiet," Tarek said. "I swear, silence gives her hives." "Or she hates not controlling the room," Ashlyn said. "Different animals, same family." She apologized, Maya said, privately. "That's good for him," Tarek said. "The room still thinks quiet kid got owned." "Then we teach the room," Maya said. She turned to Daniel, who'd slid in at the end of the bench with a tray balanced like a truce. "If you want, I'll say something next period. Not your business. Just the process." "If it helps," he said. "It will," Maya said, decisive. She nudged his juice. "Drink." "Don't boss him," Tarek said, wounded. "That's my role." "Your role is to stop dipping pretzels in applesauce," Ashlyn said. They laughed. The laughter took the knot around the morning and loosened it, even if it didn't untie. 7th period. Harlow did what she rarely did. Began without a marker in her hand. She set it down, folded her fingers, and faced the class as if it were one person who might deserve the truth. "Before we start," she said, "I made a mistake this morning." Chairs stilled. Eyes rose. Even the lights seemed to buzz more quietly. "I removed a student for not meeting my expectation of verbal participation," she said. "There were accommodations on file I did not see. That's on our system. Acting before asking is on me." She waited, not for applause, not for absolution, for the words to be the size they needed to be. "In this room," she continued, "listening counts. Silence is an absence. It's often where thinking lives. Today you can choose your route. Speak, write, mark. Same question, same credit." Maya lifted her hand. "Can I say one thing?" Harlow nodded. "Sometimes the quietest person is doing the loudest work," Maya said. "It's just not noise. Maybe we should try hearing that, too." Someone snorted. Someone nodded. Mostly the room absorbed it. Harlow turned to Daniel. "Thanks for letting us adjust." He lifted a page bristling with tabs and tapped a line. "Here," he said, a single word that said more than paragraph. "I'm in the room. On my terms. After class," Harlow said. "We'll talk." The last bell spat the day into the parking lot. The air smelled like cut grass and bus exhaust. In the side lot, Superintendent Moore leaned against a sedan with the kind of patience that looks like calm and is actually discipline. "You didn't have to wait," Daniel said, approaching. "I wanted to," Moore said, unlocking the passenger door. They drove a block in comfortable silence. "When I was your age," Moore said, "I thought quiet meant weak. And now," Daniel asked. "Now I know it takes strength we don't teach enough," Moore said. "Especially to boys." "Especially to boys who don't want to perform being boys," Daniel said. Moore smiled. "Especially those." The light turned green. They rolled forward with the rest of the world. "Board meeting Thursday," Moore added. "Your business isn't on the agenda. Our communication system is." "You don't have to defend me," Daniel said. "I'm defending the next kid who doesn't have a superintendent for a father," Moore replied. Friday, Harlow handed back essays. She didn't watch Daniel tuck his beneath his notebook. She let the ritual stand. When the bell rang, he stayed. She did too. He laid out 3 pages with tabs like tiny flags and a sentence written across the top margin. Silence isn't empty. It's a border around meaning. They talked for 12 minutes. Harlow listened in the way she wished she'd taught herself earlier. Daniel pointed at a metaphor the class had stepped over like a crack in the sidewalk. She stepped back and saw it. He didn't perform answers. She didn't perform praise. It felt unexpectedly, like teaching. "Thank you," she said at the end. "See you," he said. In the hall, Maya fell into step. "So?" She listened. He said, "Progress," she said. A week later, Harlow wrote 3 options beneath the objective. Speak. Write. Mark. "Pick your route," she said. Same destination. She didn't announce a transformation. She modeled one. It mattered more. Hands rose. Pen scratched. Tabs fluttered. When she called on Daniel, he lifted his page, tapped a line, and said, quietly here, it was small. It was a lot. It was enough. People told the story in different shapes later. In some versions, a strict teacher softened. In others, a broken system got patched. The version that mattered most was simpler. A quiet kid asked to be left alone while his brain recalibrated. A teacher forgot to ask why. Another adult remembered. And a room practiced a better way to count what counts. On a slate gray afternoon, Harlow stood in room 214 after everyone had left, reading a line she assigned a dozen times but never heard. It wasn't about silence in the poem. It was about silence in her. She turned off the lights and stood in the doorway a second longer than needed, letting the dark settle like an honest thing. A mile away at a long light, Daniel texted Maya a photo of the next book, its edge bristling with tabs like bright, cautious feathers. She sent back a voice memo, laughing. He didn't play it yet. He'd listen later. He'd answer later. And when he did, it would be enough. By Tuesday morning, word of the Daniel situation had made it to Ms. Alvarez, the school counselor. She was a small, sharp-eyed woman whose office always smelled faintly of peppermint tea and pencil shavings. Her walls were covered in student artwork, not because she was sentimental, but because it was easier for teenagers to talk when they weren't looking directly at her. She called Daniel down during study hall. When he arrived, she gestured toward the soft chair across from her desk. "I'm guessing you know why I wanted to see you." Daniel shrugged lightly. "I can guess." She pulled a thin manila folder from the stack. "Your father already emailed me the accommodation note. I have it. What I don't have is your version of how the last few days have felt." Daniel leaned back. "Quiet." Her lips quirked. "That's the headline. What's the article?" He glanced at the bulletin board behind her, filled with flyers for mindfulness workshops and career days. "I don't like when people decide I'm doing nothing, just because I'm not talking. Has that been happening a lot?" He nodded. "Since the concussion, yeah. Before that, sometimes." Ms. Alvarez rested her elbows on the desk. "You understand your teacher perspective?" "Mostly." She thought I was avoiding the work. "And you weren't." "No," Daniel said flatly. "I was doing it in my head." She let the silence hang for a beat. "Would you like me to be in the loop if something like this happens again?" Daniel considered. "Yeah, but don't make a big deal." "Noted." She scribbled something on a sticky note and slapped it to the inside of the folder. "By the way, I've been telling teachers for years, the quiet ones aren't the ones to worry about. They're usually the ones paying attention." Daniel smiled faintly. "That's the nicest stereotype I've heard all week." That same afternoon, the faculty lounge was its usual mix of clinking mugs and quiet complaints. Mr. Singh, the math teacher, was hunched over a grating pile. Coach Barnes was in the corner stirring sugar into his coffee like it had wronged him. Harlow walked in and felt the air change. A few teachers glanced up. Some knew exactly what had happened in her room. Others only knew there had been an incident. Barnes broke the ice. "Heard you had a run-in with the superintendent's kid." "Run-in is one way to put it," Harlow said, moving to the coffee pot. Singh set down his pen. "Honestly, I think we've all been there. Try to run a lesson, someone not engaging." "It wasn't disengagement," Harlow cut in. "It was medical." Barnes raised his brows. "And no one told you?" "Email glitch," she said. "But that's not the point. I should have asked. I didn't." Singh nodded. "Happens. What matters is what you do after." "That's the question," Harlow said. "How do we keep rigor without steamrolling someone who's working differently?" Coach Barnes grunted. "Maybe rigor is not about volume. I've got kids who yell the right answer and still can't pass the test." The room went quiet for a moment. For a faculty lounge, that was saying something. Thursday evening, the school board gathered in the district's conference room. Superintendent Moore sat at the head of the table, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow. On the agenda, routine budget approvals, a facilities report, and buried halfway down, communication protocol for student accommodations. Moore leaned into the mic. "We had a failure last week," he began. A medical accommodation didn't reach the right teacher in time. The result was avoidable conflict in the classroom. A few board members shifted in their chairs. From this point forward, Moore continued, accommodations will be pushed through 3 channels: email, SIS alert, and direct confirmation from the counseling office. No single point of failure. He didn't mention Daniel's name. He didn't have to. A few members already knew, but the way he framed it wasn't about one student. It was about every student who might fall into the same crack. Board member Ms. Rhodes asked, "What's the cost?" "Minimal," Moore said. "Mostly staff time to double-check. Worth it if it prevents one misunderstanding." The motion passed unanimously. By Friday, Maya had been carrying something in her head all week, a speech she hadn't decided whether to give. In English class, after a discussion where Daniel participated with his marked pages, Maya raised her hand. "Can I say something that's not about the book?" Harlow looked at her. "If it's worth the class's time." "It is," Maya said. "We all saw what happened Monday. Some people decided it meant one thing. But here's the truth. Listening can be work. Writing can be work. Not everyone has to show their brain on their tongue for it to count." She let her gaze sweep the room. "I just think if we start assuming the worst about each other, we're going to miss the best parts." Nobody laughed. Nobody rolled their eyes. They just thought about it. Saturday morning, Daniel sat at the kitchen table, his backpack open beside him. His father poured coffee and leaned against the counter. "Plans today?" Moore asked. "Homework. Maybe the park." Moore nodded. "You know, when I was your age, if I'd had the week you just had, I would have wanted to skip school for a month." Daniel shrugged. "Skipping doesn't fix anything." Moore smiled. "You sound like me." "Or maybe you sound like me," Daniel said, smirking. Moore chuckled. "Touché." When Daniel walked into room 214 the following Monday, it felt different. Not dramatically, but enough. Some students nodded to him in quiet acknowledgement. Harlow gave him a small smile that wasn't forced. Even the air in the room seemed a little lighter. Halfway through class, Harlow asked him to share a passage he'd marked. He tapped the page and read a single sentence aloud, his voice still a little careful but steady. The room listened. No one interrupted. In the weeks that followed, the story lost its sharp edges. It became less about the superintendent's son and more about the lesson. Don't mistake silence for absence. For Harlow, it was a reminder that her authority wasn't weakened by asking questions. It was strengthened. For Daniel, it was proof that sometimes a room can learn. For the rest of the class, it was one more example of how quickly a misunderstanding can grow, and how quickly it can be fixed if someone's willing to listen. One gray afternoon, Maya leaned across the table at lunch and asked, "So, quiet week?" Daniel smiled. "The quietest." And for once, everyone understood what that meant.